Hi guys, today I want to change the topic. I've been talking about estate planning. I will come back to that later, but today I just want to switch to a topic that I haven't talked about. It's actually, I read an article in Bloomberg by a columnist. His name is David Fickling, and it's a very excellent observation using the data from something called Quality First, a database in the US. And then he was talking about something that I've been meaning to talk about. He's basically saying that the Chinese electrical vehicle EV industry has been pretty strong, basically beating the other guys, mature guys, like um, 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 German and Japanese guys in terms of EV. The Chinese guys are really catching up. And then he asked us three questions. Right? He said, basically, in response to what has been prevailing, the argument that are presented, that especially in the West, in the U.S. media, they're talking about the Chinese EV industry leading the world because three factors. Number one, is government subsidies. Number two, they got a favorable government taxes rate, lower tax rate. Number three is that they got a cheap capitals. And then David, Ficklin is talking about all three cannot stand because it doesn't uh, stand against the fact. He is using the fact that checking with the database that is widely available to the public. And then he found that just, let's begin from the subsidies. Whenever you talk about this, actually today when I checked into Gemini and asked how would you explain that the Chinese EV business has been leading the world? The first thing, very first thing is that they say that government support, subsidies, right? And then it's very interesting that the Ficklin present a chart, like basically column chart. And um, you can see that all over the world, right? And let's say Chinese, there's a number one EV producer. It's called the BYD. It's a really, the Western people don't hear that much because it's actually in Chinese called a Biyadi. That's actually BYD stand for Build Your Dream. So it really means something, but because Chinese are not very good in the branding. So even though it's the number one biggest EV exporter, the number one biggest the producer of EV producers, and people in this country rarely heard about this. Okay, whenever we heard about, we always think about the Tesla, right? Tesla is good, but BRD sometimes is even in some field is even better than Tesla. But here, let's say, look at the numbers because you can look at the balance sheet, you can look at the income statement, P&L, profit and loss, all those financial statement. Yeah, they're public companies, right? So they can't really hide. So the fact is this, when it comes to government subsidies, guess who is number one? Volkswagen, the German guys, in the Northern America. I guess at least in the North America, they received a lot of government subsidies. The highest, number one. When you look at the chart, you see that the longest bar is actually from Volkswagen. Number two, guess what? Number two is Ford. Right? So BRD is actually below that. It's not the fact is that at the beginning, when the startup stage, government give them subsidies, which is a common all over the world. But at this stage, they're already mature. They're already standing on their own. That government subsidies basically has been significantly reduced. So this is a very interesting fact that we need to compare that. One thing I've been always wondering is that, all the Chinese, so many scholars, so many practitioners, they have none of them can produce write up articles like this and compare this, and then they just let the Westerner just do the job and then smear job and then say make those lies or exaggerations, and then nobody says something. The Chinese is I can't believe it that all the Chinese, they are focusing on the domestic. They're writing in Chinese, either impressing other Chinese, impressing the government. But when you need somebody to speak up internationally, there's nobody there. Okay, it's just such a disaster, just a disaster. But anyway, so here is the subsidies. What about taxes? If you look at the tax, there's another chart. You can see that actually the number one, the biggest, highest taxpayer in it's also from China. It's way across, almost like 100%. It feels like 100%. It's really high tax rate. It's paid by Geely. It's another Chinese EV producers. And then number two is the Shanghai Automobile Industry Corporation. That's the number two. And then the other, so you can see the number one and number two, the highest tax rate is actually paid by Chinese. Don't believe that, that uh, because everything is attributed to the government, the government don't charge them higher taxes. That's no longer the case. Okay, maybe in the beginning, the startup stage, but not anymore. So that word is gone. So number three, finally, we'll talk about the cost of capital, right? And you can see that. Let me look at the chart. When it comes to cost of capital, the common sense would say because China has a lot of money, people saves a lot, right? So you would think that that the money comes cheap, right? Because the saving rate is so high, and the bank would have to fund out the producers who lend them money. But it's interesting to find out that on the something called a WACC, basically means a weighted average cost of capital. It's a very important indicator for the companies how much how high is the cost for them. If you forget about the weighted and average, and then just the CC just the cost of capital. Obviously, for any producer, for any company, the lower the cost, the better, right? Because it's money. If money comes easy, then you can, add value more or add more value to it, and then you can produce higher return, right? So everybody, all the companies, they always look for lower cost of capital. But when you look at the chart again, you find that the number one is the highest. Let me see. Yeah, they listed the chart. WACC goes from top to the highest cost to lowest cost. You can see that the number one is actually the Korean car maker. It's called Kia. Kia has the highest, almost 20% of a weighted average cost of capital, and then followed by Tesla, and then followed by Chinese Biadi Biodiojun. Okay, so you can see that it's not again, it's not the story that because China money is cheap, a lot of people savings a lot, so the capital comes cheap. No, not always the case. One reason is that if you look at the composition of the capital, you see that the BYD, BYD, okay, because in Chinese we all know that we call them BYD. BYD is actually the many rely on equity. When you talk about the cost of capital, there are basically two sources. Number one is debt. You basically get the loan from the bank, and then the other one is just the stock market. Right? People pay, become the owner, and then you pay that. So there's you can say that the BRD is actually they prefer the equity, okay, over the debt. So that's the same. When it comes to cost of capital, Tesla is number two. But when you look at the composition of the capital, Tesla is basically it's almost ignorable. Basically, 1.2% of the debt mostly depends on the equities. I guess the other thing is that Tesla has done a good job to promote it. So you always hear the story that people are waiting up, they form a line waiting to buy a Tesla. So this kind of thing is provide a cheap fund, okay? Because people already put the money down, and then so you got the money in your hand, not from the bank, not probably not. Also, Tesla also depends on the equity, but it's making capital cheap. Okay, so those are the three things that let's stop here.